The first crack appeared on a Tuesday, which is funny because Tuesdays are supposed to be boring. My life, at 23, was a carefully curated slideshow of acceptable mediocrity. A marketing job I didn't hate, an apartment with a roommate who mostly stayed with her boyfriend, and a family group chat that pinged with the relentless cheer of a daytime talk show. My mother was the producer, director, and star of that show. I was scrolling through my lunch break, thumb aching from the monotony, when her latest post loaded. A panorama of our backyard, the infinity pool gleaming like a sheet of sapphire, the rose garden in obscenely perfect bloom. The caption, "Grateful for these little slices of heaven. #blessed #home is where the heart is #summer vibes." There were already 47 likes. My father was probably the first, a digital thumbs up, his primary form of communication these days. I sighed and was about to close the app when my finger froze. In the top right corner of the photo, just peeking from behind the old oak tree, was the corner of the guest house. And tucked beside that corner, barely visible, was a bicycle. A specific bicycle. A cobalt blue Trek road bike with a slightly bent rear wheel rim. My breath hitched. That was Alex's bike. My older brother, Alex, who had died 5 years ago in a car accident on the Pacific Coast Highway. His bike had been hanging, untouched, in our parents' garage since the funeral. A shrine in wheels and carbon fiber. My mother dusted it every week. Yet here it was, leaning against the guest house. In a photo taken yesterday, a cold trickle, like spilled soda, ran down my spine. I zoomed in, my heart doing a clumsy tap dance against my ribs. The image pixelated into meaningless squares. It could be a trick of the light, a shadow, a similar bike. But I knew that bike. I'd borrowed it once without asking when I was 16 and gotten the most severe, silent treatment of my life from my mother. "Some things are not to be touched, Maya," she'd said, her voice like chilled steel. "They're all we have left." I stared at the pixelated blob of blue until my eyes blurred. My lunch, a sad desk salad, turned to paste in my mouth. "It's a mistake," I told myself. "A glitch. Mom probably moved it to clean the garage and forgot to move it back." But the guest house? That made no sense. The guest house was my father's domain, his man cave, though he wasn't the cave type. It was where he retreated to tinker with old radios, a hobby that had sprung up, fully formed, about 3 years ago. The rest of us never went in there. It was an unspoken rule, as solid as the no shoes on the cream carpet rule. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a fog, my productivity sinking to zero. At 5:01 p.m., I was in my car, driving the 40 minutes from my city apartment to the suburban perfection of my childhood home. The house, a sprawling Spanish colonial revival, always looked like it was waiting for a magazine shoot. It was immaculate, silent, and somehow sadder for its beauty. I used my key and let myself in. The air was cool, scented with lemon verbena and the faint, ever-present smell of wealth, a clean, polished odor. "Hello," I called out, my voice too loud in the marble foyer. "In the kitchen, sweetie." My mother's voice was a melodic bell. She was at the massive granite island, arranging heirloom tomatoes on a platter with the concentration of a neurosurgeon. She looked, as always, flawless. Honey blonde hair in a sleek bob, linen trousers that somehow never wrinkled, a single strand of pearls. She was 55, but could have passed for 40 in the right light, which was always strategically arranged. "Maya, what a lovely surprise." She came around and air-kissed my cheek. "I didn't know you were coming. Everything okay?" "Yeah, just wanted to say hi. Had a slow day." I leaned against the counter, watching her. "Dad home, out back, in his workshop." She said it with a slight, affectionate eye roll. "Trying to get a 1930s Philco to play FM radio. A noble quest." She turned back to her tomatoes. "You'll stay for dinner? I'm doing an Equaz salad." "Sure." I paused. "Hey, I saw your Instagram. The backyard looks amazing." Her back straightened, just a fraction. "Thank you, darling. Eduardo did a wonderful job with the roses this year." "Yeah, it's really something." I took a breath. I even saw Alex's bike in the corner of the shot, in front of the guest house. The paring knife in her hand stilled for a single, telling second. Then she resumed her precise slicing. "Oh, that. Yes. Your father was doing a deep clean of the garage last weekend. Some rodent got into the insulation, a whole mess. We had to move everything out. He must have left it there. I'll have him put it back." It was smooth, plausible, but the pause was a hair too long, the explanation a touch too detailed. My mother was a master of deflection, but I'd been her audience for 23 years. I knew her cues. Right. Makes sense. I pushed off the counter. I'll go say hi to Dad. Take him a La Croix, she said, her tone light again. He forgets to hydrate when he's in his zone. I grabbed a can from the Sub-Zero and walked through the immaculate living room, through the French doors, and out onto the patio. The evening was warm, the pool glowing with underwater lights. The guest house sat about 50 feet away, a smaller, charming replica of the main house. A soft yellow light glowed in its single window. I walked over, the grass soft under my feet. I could hear the faint, tinny sound of old-time jazz coming from inside. I raised my hand to knock on the solid oak door, but hesitated. I looked to the side of the small structure, where the bike had been in the photo. It wasn't there. My eyes scanned the area. Nothing but perfectly edged lawn and a tasteful potted olive tree. I walked around the side. No bike. I completed a full circle. It was gone. The chill returned, deeper this time. It hadn't been my imagination, and my mother had just lied to me. I knocked, the sound sharp in the quiet evening. A few seconds later, the door opened. My father stood there, blinking behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He wore old khakis and a radio station t-shirt from a long-defunct AM station. Maya. Hi. Hey, Dad. Mom sent you this. I handed him the La Croix. Oh, thanks. He took it, holding it awkwardly. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes more pronounced than I remembered. What brings you by? Just visiting. Saw Mom's Instagram. The place looks great. He nodded, taking a sip of the water. She works hard on it. An awkward silence stretched. My father and I had never been great talkers. Our relationship was a series of pleasantries and safe topics. Work, the weather, his radios. Since Alex's death, a vast, unbridgeable distance had opened between all of us, filled with things we didn't say. So, what are you working on? I asked, peering past him into the guest house. I'd only been inside a handful of times. It was one large room, a sitting area with a worn leather sofa, a workbench covered in electronic parts and old radio shelves, a small kitchenette, and a door that I assumed led to a bathroom. Just the Philco, a stubborn old girl. He moved slightly, blocking more of my view. It wasn't aggressive, but it was deliberate. You staying for dinner? Yeah. Mom's making salad. Good. He nodded again. I'll be in soon. Just want to finish this capacitor. Okay. I forced a smile. Don't work too hard. I walked back to the main house, my mind worrying. The missing bike. My mother's lie. My father's subtle barrier at the door. A tiny, insistent voice in my head started whispering. Something is wrong here. Dinner was a masterpiece of superficial normalcy. We ate the perfect salad. We discussed my job, my mother's upcoming charity gala, my father's radios. The conversation flowed like a shallow, sparkling stream over very deep, very dark rocks. I watched them. My mother's laughter was a fraction too high. My father's contributions were sparse, his eyes often drifting to the window that faced the guest house. I felt like an anthropologist observing a strange, fragile tribe. So, Dad, I said during a lull, Mom said you had a rodent problem in the garage. That's why Alex's bike was moved. My father's fork clinked softly against his plate. He looked at my mother. A micro-expression, a tightening at the corner of her mouth, flashed across her face before her serene mask slipped back into place. Yes, my father said, his voice gravelly. A pack rat. Made a terrible nest. Had to pull everything out to exterminate. Must have been a big job. Where'd you put everything? The patio. Covered it with tarps. My mother answered smoothly. It's all back now. Took most of the weekend. I didn't see the bike when I walked by the guest house earlier, I said, keeping my tone casual, conversational. This time, the silence was palpable. My father took a long drink of water. I put it back in the garage this afternoon, he said finally. After your mother mentioned it. Right. Of course. I speared a green bean. The lie was now a collaborative effort. They were both in on it. Whatever it was. A seed of dread, cold and hard, planted itself in my gut. I finished dinner, helped clean up, and made my excuses to leave. As I drove back to my apartment, the quiet of the car allowed the whispers in my head to become shouts. What were they hiding? Why lie about a bicycle? What was in the guest house that my father didn't want me to see? The next 2 weeks were agony. I was a ghost in my own life, going through the motions at work, canceling on friends. I was obsessed. I drove by the house twice after work, parking down the street, feeling like a private investigator in my own family drama. I saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the beautiful, silent house. The guest house light on each evening. I started digging digitally. My parents were not heavy social media users beyond my mother's curated perfection, but I combed through everything. Old posts, tagged photos. My father had a LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in a decade. My mother's Facebook was locked down tight. But then, on a forgotten Flickr account linked to my father's old email, which I remembered from helping him set up an iPad years ago, I found a trove of older family photos. Most were from before Alex died. Birthdays, vacations, us as gawky kids. I scrolled through them with a nostalgic ache. And then I saw it. A photo from about 4 years ago. A backyard barbecue. My parents, Alex, me, we were grouped around the grill, laughing. And in the background, slightly blurred, was the guest house. And in its window, a face. I nearly dropped my laptop. I zoomed in frantically. The image was blurry, pixelated. But it was undeniably a person. A young man, looking out. He had dark hair. I couldn't make out his features. My heart hammered. Who was that? A friend of Alex's? A guest? But why would a guest be peering out the window like that, separate from the party? The date on the photo was June, 4 years ago. Alex died in November, 5 years ago. So this was 7 months after his death. I sat back, my hands trembling. A guest, 7 months after our family was shattered? It made no sense. We didn't have guests. My mother had withdrawn from almost all social life after Alex. She said she couldn't bear the pity. Unless it wasn't a guest. The idea came to me fully formed, absurd, and terrifying. What if Alex hadn't died? The thought was so ludicrous I almost laughed out loud. I'd seen the police report. I'd seen the wrecked car. We'd had a closed casket funeral because the impact was so severe. The idea was gothic, insane. But the bike, the lies, the face in the window. I needed to get inside that guest house. My opportunity came the following Thursday. My mother's weekly charity board meeting ran from 1 to 4 p.m. My father, I knew from the family Google Calendar, which my mother insisted we all share for coordination, had a dentist appointment at 2:30. They would both be gone. I called in sick to work, a knot of anxiety and determination in my throat. At 1:45 p.m., I pulled into their driveway. The house was still, the only sound the hum of the central air conditioning. I let myself in. Hello. I called just in case. Silence echoed back. I went straight through the house and out the back. The guest house door was, unsurprisingly, locked. I'd anticipated this. When I was 14, Alex had shown me how to pick the lock on our treehouse with a bobby pin and a tension wrench, a skill he'd learned from the internet. I'd brought a small kit. My hands were slick with sweat. Every rustle of leaves, every distant car sound made me jump. It took me 3 tries, my fingers fumbling, but finally, I felt the satisfying click. The door swung inward. The smell hit me first. Not dust or electronics. It was the clean, antiseptic smell of laundry detergent and antibacterial wipes. Underneath, the faint, metallic scent of vitamins? Protein powder? The space was neater than I'd ever seen it. The workbench was organized, the radios lined up like museum pieces. The leather sofa had a neat blanket folded over its back. I walked in slowly, my senses on high alert. It looked like a living space. A lived-in space. I went to the door that led to the bathroom. I pushed it open. It wasn't a bathroom. It was a small bedroom. A twin bed, neatly made with a navy blue duvet. A simple dresser. A bookshelf filled with paperbacks, sci-fi, thrillers, a few classics. On the dresser, a framed photograph. My legs turned to water. I stumbled forward, grabbing the dresser for support. The photograph was of my brother, Alex. It was a professional headshot, the one he'd taken for his college graduation portfolio. He was smiling, his green eyes crinkling at the corners, his dark hair a little too long. My Alex. But next to that frame was another. A more recent photo. Alex again, but older, thinner. His face more angular, the light in his eyes dimmer. He was sitting in a wheelchair on a patio I didn't recognize, a blanket over his lap. He was smiling, but it looked strained. A roaring sound filled my ears. The room tilted. I gripped the dresser harder, my knuckles white. I heard the sound of a car, door shutting outside. Panic, pure and electric, shot through me. I backed out of the bedroom, my eyes scanning the main room. I saw it then, on the kitchenette counter, half hidden behind a blender. A pill organizer. The large, weekly kind, with compartments for morning, noon, evening, and night. It was filled. Footsteps on the flagstone path. I had seconds. I couldn't go out the front. I spotted a small, high window in the back wall of the main room, near the workbench. It led to the narrow side yard. I scrambled onto the bench, knocking over a screwdriver, and wrestled the window latch open. It was a tight squeeze, but I wriggled through, scraping my hip, and dropped onto the soft dirt below. I crouched, listening. I heard the main door open. Heard my father's voice, weary. Just gonna grab that issue of Radio World. Then another voice. A voice I hadn't heard in 5 years, but one I heard every night in my dreams. Lower, rougher, slurred slightly, but unmistakable. Did you get the bananas? The soft ones. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stop the sob that ripped from my throat. I huddled against the stucco wall, shaking violently, as my father's answer floated out the window I'd just escaped through. Yes, son. I got the bananas. I drove. I don't remember getting to my car or leaving my parents' neighborhood. I found myself parked at the empty lot of my old elementary school, the engine off, my entire body trembling as if with fever. My brother was alive. Alex was alive. He'd been living in our backyard guest house for years. While I grieved. While we had a funeral. While I left flowers on a grave with his name on it. The betrayal was so vast, so profound, it felt like the ground had opened beneath me. Every memory of the past 5 years, every quiet dinner, every strained holiday, every time my mother had teared up at the mention of his name, every time my father had stared into the middle distance, was now poisoned, revealed as a grotesque performance. They had been living a double life, and I, their daughter, had been cast in the role of the grieving fool. Anger came first, a white-hot torrent of it. It burned through the shock and the hurt. They had stolen my grief. They had stolen my truth. They had made me a stranger in my own family. I screamed in the car, pounding my fists on the steering wheel until they ached. Then the questions flooded in, cold and logical. Why? Why? The accident had been real. The car was totaled. The police report, had it been falsified? Had they bribed someone? And Alex, the wheelchair. The pills. The slurred speech. What had happened to him? The accident must have left him severely injured, but not dead. Brain damage? Paralysis? And instead of bringing him home, instead of letting me help, they had hidden him. Pretended he was gone. To protect him? To protect their image? My mother's perfect, tragic narrative of the beautiful young son taken too soon was a far more palatable Instagram story than the messy, difficult reality of a severely disabled child requiring round-the-clock care. A story of loss garnered sympathy. A story of profound disability required pity, resources, and would shatter the facade of effortless perfection she'd spent a lifetime building. I thought of the charity galas, the In Memory of Alex scholarship fund she'd started. It was all a lie. A profitable, socially acceptable lie. I didn't go home. I drove to the only place that felt remotely sane, my best friend Chloe's apartment. I showed up a weeping, shaking mess. She got me inside, onto her couch, wrapped me in a blanket, and just listened as the whole horrific story tumbled out in broken, hysterical fragments. Holy fucking shit, Maya, she breathed when I finally finished, my voice raw. I don't even have a word for it. This is criminal. This is psychological warfare. What do I do? I whispered, feeling like a lost child. You confront them, she said, her face set with a fierce determination I lacked. You march over there and you demand the truth. The whole truth. And you don't let them gaslight you. You have evidence. You saw him. You heard him. She was right. But the thought of facing them, of seeing Alex, it terrified me. The brother in my memory was vibrant, sarcastic, protective. The voice I'd heard through the window was that of an invalid. Which one was real? Who had they been hiding all these years? I spent the night at Chloe's, sleepless, running through every possible scenario. By morning, the anger had crystallized into a cold, hard resolution. I would not be the pawn in their play anymore. I waited until the evening. I needed them both to be home. I dressed in simple, dark clothes, as if for a battle. Chloe wanted to come, but I refused. This was my family. My war. I didn't bother with the front door this time. I walked straight around the side of the house to the backyard. The patio lights were on. My parents were sitting at the outdoor table, sharing a bottle of wine. The scene of domestic peace made bile rise in my throat. They saw me approach. My mother's smile was instant, then faltered as she registered my expression. My father set his glass down slowly. Maya, sweetheart, we didn't know you were. Where is he? My voice cut through the evening air, flat and hard. My mother's face went pale. Where is who, darling? Don't, I spat. Don't you dare. I know, Mom. I know everything. I was here yesterday. I heard him. I saw his room. The mask shattered. Her composure evaporated, leaving behind a raw, frightened woman I barely recognized. Her hand flew to her pearls. My father slumped in his chair, his head bowing as if in defeat. Maya, he began, his voice thick. You don't understand. You're damn right I don't understand. I shouted, the fury breaking free. My brother is alive. He's been living in your goddamn backyard for 5 years, and you told me he was dead. You let me mourn him. You made me visit a grave. What is wrong with you? Tears were streaming down my mother's face now, silent, perfect tears. We were protecting you, she whispered. Protecting me? From what? From my own brother? From this, my father roared suddenly, startling us both. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly. He pointed a shaking finger toward the guest house. From the reality of this. That is not Alex in there, Maya. Not the Alex you knew. That is a body that needs feeding and cleaning and turning so it doesn't get bed sores. That is a mind that comes and goes, that remembers how to tie a shoe 1 minute and doesn't know his own name the next. That is 24 hours a day of heartbreak and shit and silence. We spared you that. His outburst hung in the air, brutal and ugly. My mother was sobbing quietly into her hands. You didn't spare me, I said, my voice trembling but clear. You lied to me. You made my grief a prop in your performance. You decided what I could and couldn't handle. You took my brother from me twice. What was the alternative? My mother cried, looking up, her mascara streaking. Bring him into the house. Have you give up your life, your future, to help us care for a vegetable? You were 17. You had college. A life. I had a right to choose. I screamed back. He was my brother. You had no right to make that choice for me. You robbed me of the chance to say goodbye to the brother I knew, and you robbed me of the chance to know the brother who survived. You're monsters. Both of you. I turned and stared at the guest house. The light was on. He was in there, probably listening to every word. My brother. A stranger. I want to see him, I said, turning back to them. Now. My father looked at my mother. A silent communication passed between them, a lifetime of shared secrets and burdens. Finally, my mother gave a tiny, defeated nod. My father pulled a keychain from his pocket, walked to the guest house door, and unlocked it. He didn't go in. He just held the door open for me, his eyes full of a pain so deep it was bottomless. I walked past him. The antiseptic smell was stronger now. The main room was empty. I walked to the bedroom door, my heart a frantic drum in my chest. I pushed it open. He was sitting in a motorized wheelchair by the window, looking out at the darkening garden. He turned his head slowly as I entered. It was Alex. And it wasn't. His face was thinner, gaunt. A scar, pale and jagged, traced from his hairline down to his temple. His dark hair was cut short, practical. His green eyes, once so full of mischief and intelligence, were cloudy, the focus unclear. One side of his mouth drooped slightly. He was wearing sweatpants and a clean, plain t-shirt. A blanket was tucked around his legs. He looked at me. A long, slow look. His brow furrowed slightly, as if trying to place me. Hi, Alex, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He blinked. His mouth worked for a moment before sound emerged, the words thick and labored. Do I know you? The 4 words were a physical blow. I gripped the doorframe. It's me, Maya, your sister. He stared. Maya, he repeated, as if testing the word. Then something flickered in his eyes. A tiny spark. Little M. With the purple dinosaur. A sob escaped me. My childhood nickname. My obsession with Barney. Yes, I choked out. Yeah, that's me. He nodded slowly, a small, lopsided smile touching his good side. You cried. When I hit him. I remembered. I was 6. He'd hidden my Barney plush as a joke, and I'd cried for an hour until he'd produced it with a flourish, making me laugh through my tears. I took a step into the room. Can I sit? He gestured vaguely with a hand that curled in on itself. I pulled the desk chair over and sat facing him. We just looked at each other for a long time. The brother I'd idolized, the ghost I'd mourned, reduced to this shell in a wheelchair. Do you understand? I asked gently. Do you understand what happened? Where you've been? His face clouded. Accident, he said, the word clear. Car. Loud. Then quiet. For a long time. He tapped the side of his head. Broken. In here. Mom. Dad. Here. You. He frowned, struggling. You were gone. They told me you were dead, Alex. His cloudy eyes met mine. He didn't look surprised. He looked sad. A deep, weary sadness that seemed to come from his bones. Easier, he whispered. For who? I asked, tears streaming down my face. He didn't answer. He just looked out the window again, retreating into the quiet place in his mind. I stayed with him for an hour. I talked about stupid, inconsequential things, my job, my apartment, a movie I'd seen. He listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes seeming miles away. He spoke in short, halting phrases. He remembered our childhood dog's name before he remembered the year. The past was clearer to him than the present. Finally, he grew tired, his eyelids drooping. I stood up. I'll come back, Alex. Okay. He looked at me, that faint spark returning for a second. Okay, little M. I leaned down and, hesitantly, kissed his scarred forehead. He didn't flinch. He smelled of soap and that faint, medicinal odor. I walked out of the guest house. My parents were still at the table, the bottle of wine empty. They looked utterly broken. I stopped in front of them. The anger was still there, a cold stone in my chest, but it was now mixed with a devastating, complicated grief. For the brother I lost. For the brother I found. For the parents who had chosen the most catastrophic way to cope. How could you? I asked, my voice drained of all its earlier fire. My mother looked up, her face ravaged. After the accident, he was in a coma for months. The prognosis was he would never walk, never care for himself. His cognitive function, it was a living death, Maya. The kindest thing, everyone said, was to let go. We started the process. The funeral arrangements. And then he woke up. Not all the way, but he woke up. And he was in there. Trapped. We couldn't put our son in some institution. We couldn't burden you with that life. So we brought him home. And we told everyone he had died. It was a clean break. A tragedy people could understand. This, she waved a hand toward the guest house. This is a tragedy no one knows how to talk about. You had a nurse, I stated, piecing it together. That's why Dad took up radios. He was here, in the guest house, all the time. Not tinkering. Caring for Alex. My father nodded, his eyes red-rimmed. We have a nurse who comes for 4 hours a day, for the heavy lifting. The rest, it's us. Your mother handles the days when I'm at the office. I take the nights. The sheer, grinding weight of their secret life settled on me. The isolation. The exhaustion. The lie they had to maintain every single second they were outside that guest house door. You should have told me, I said, but it was a whisper now. You were a child, my father said. And then you were building your own life. We thought we were giving you a chance. You took my chance to be his sister, I said. It was the irreducible truth. I left them there in the deepening dark. I didn't say I forgave them. I didn't say I understood. I didn't know if I ever would. The weeks that followed were the most confusing of my life. I was torn in two. One part of me was still furious, betrayed, wanting to scorch the earth, to expose their lie to the world, to make them feel the pain they'd inflicted on me. The other part saw my brother's cloudy eyes, heard my father's broken roar, saw my mother's shattered mask, and felt a pity so profound it hurt. I started visiting Alex regularly. I went after work, when my father was usually with him. At first, my parents were wary, terrified I would cause a scene or upset Alex. But I just sat with him. I brought old photo albums. I read to him. Sometimes he was present, asking a fragmented question, smiling at an old picture. Sometimes he was just a silent presence in the room. One afternoon, he was having a good day. He was more alert, his speech slightly clearer. We were looking at a photo from my high school graduation. Proud, he said, tapping the photo of me in my cap and gown. Was proud. You weren't there, Alex, I said softly, the old hurt resurfacing. He looked at me, his gaze surprisingly direct. New, he said, laboring over the words. Mom showed me. Picture. Cried. Sorry. I missed it. It was the first time he'd ever acknowledged the lie, the separation, from his perspective. My breath caught. I missed you too. Every day. He reached out his good hand, the movement slow and deliberate, and placed it over mine on the arm of his wheelchair. His grip was weak, but the intent was solid. A connection, 5 years delayed, finally made. That was the moment I began to separate my parents' betrayal from my relationship with my brother. They had wronged me, unforgivably. But Alex was a victim too, perhaps the biggest victim of all. He hadn't chosen to be hidden away. He'd simply been stored, like his bike in the garage. The confrontation with my parents was a slow, cold process. We didn't have dramatic fights. We had tense, loaded conversations that always ended in tears, theirs of guilt and exhaustion, mine of anger and hurt. I demanded the full medical truth. I learned the extent of his traumatic brain injury, his physical disabilities. I learned about the trust fund from the wrongful death lawsuit they'd quietly settled, the money that paid for his care, and the nurse. The scholarship in his name was real and funded by that same money. A twisted attempt at some kind of penance, I supposed. My relationship with my mother was irrevocably broken. I saw the calculation behind every one of her past actions, the obsession with control and image. I couldn't look at her without seeing the director of this terrible play. My father, it was more complicated. I saw a weak man, a man who had loved his son but lacked the courage to do the right, hard thing. He had followed my mother's lead into this labyrinth of lies. 6 months after my discovery, I sat them down. The lions now, I said, with me. You will not drag this into the future. You will not let this be the family legacy. What are you saying? My mother asked, fear in her eyes. I'm saying I'm moving, Alex. They both stared at me, stunned. There's a specialized assisted living facility in Santa Barbara. It's excellent. It has cognitive therapy programs, physical therapy, a community. He'll have real care and real stimulation, not just hiding in a room watching the garden grow. We can't afford that, my father said. The trust fund can. And I've spoken to a financial advisor. It's feasible. More than feasible. He's been trapped here, in this guest house, in your secret. He needs a life. A real one, as much as he can have. He's our son, my mother wept. We can care for him. You've been keeping him alive, not living, I said, my voice cold. And you've done it at the cost of everything else. Your marriage is a ghost. Your relationship with me is broken. You have no friends, no real life. This isn't care. This is a prison you built for all of us. It's over. It took 3 more months of fighting, of legal maneuvering, as his legal guardians, they had to agree, and of slowly, painfully, bringing Alex around to the idea. I took him to visit the facility. He was nervous, but he also saw the other residents, the activities, the view of the ocean. Like a vacation? He'd asked, hopeful. Like a new chapter, I'd said. The day we moved him was the hardest day of my life, even harder than the day of his funeral. My parents were devastated, but a strange relief flickered beneath their grief. The crushing, 24-hour burden was lifting. For me, it was terrifying. I was taking responsibility for my brother, for his truth, in a way they never had. He settled in better than any of us expected. The routine, the professional care, the absence of secrecy. It was like a weight lifted from him too. He started calling me every Sunday on a video chat set up by the staff. His speech improved marginally with consistent therapy. He never became the brother I remembered, but he became a person, not a secret. My parents and I exist in a state of fragile, distant truce. We see each other on holidays. The conversations are polite, shallow. The wound is too deep to ever fully heal. I think they love me, in their twisted way. I know I can never fully trust them again. Self-respect, I learned, isn't about grand gestures. It's about drawing a line in the sand of your own soul and refusing to let anyone, even family, cross it. It was about choosing the messy, painful truth over the beautiful, comfortable lie. I visit Alex every other weekend. We sit and look at the ocean. Sometimes he remembers a piece of our childhood. Sometimes he just holds my hand and watches the gulls. It's not the relationship I wanted with my brother, but it's real, and it's mine. The house I grew up in still stands, perfect and silent. The guest house is empty now. My father finally got his real man cave, but he told me he rarely goes in there. The ghost is gone. The truth, finally, is out. And I am no longer the girl who believed in the beautiful stories. I am the woman who had to tear her family apart to put something real back together. It's a quieter life, a sadder one in many ways, but it's honest. And after 5 years in the dark, the light, however harsh, is all I ever really wanted.